I never meant to stay this long. When I first got the job at Driftwater Falls, I was fresh out of high school, eager to make a few bucks and maybe meet someone like Kayla, the girl who worked the snack shack. Bright red hair, a laugh that cut through the summer heat like a knife. We'd sneak cigarettes behind the Riptide racer ride, wet hands, and damp smoke mixing with the spray from the water jets. That summer, the park felt alive, full of energy and promise. Now, 10 years later, I'm the only one left. The summer crowds faded faster than the peeling paint on the concession stands. Kayla left for college. The manager got fired after some accidents. The new owners didn't care. One by one, everyone disappeared. But I stayed, the contract dragging me into a job no one else wanted. The first few months were quiet, almost peaceful. The pools were drained, the rides silent. I made my rounds under gray skies, checking equipment and locking gates. The wind rattled tarps stretched tight over the pools, a whispering lullaby for an empty kingdom. I'd cook dinner in the rusty trailer and stare out at the empty splash pads, feeling like a ghost myself. But then things started to change. It began with footprints, wet, muddy prints by the wave pool, like someone had slipped in. I searched the area but found no one. Radios I used to communicate with staff began crackling with static, sometimes faint voices whispering my name. Lights flickered near the jungle gym, which we called the fortress, though it was anything but safe. One cold evening, a man appeared at the gate. "Leo," he said, a hiker seeking shelter. I told him to leave, but he stayed. Next morning, he was gone without a trace, except for his jacket draped over a rusted lifeguard chair. The water around the pool was black and thick like spilled oil. I felt the park watching me. The shadows lengthened. At night, the air grew thick with a salty, rotten smell that seemed to seep from the pools themselves. The Mirage Pool, the one with the giant dragon statue, had been drained for the winter, but its surface rippled with movement. I saw scales glint under the murky water and eyes that stared without blinking. It didn't attack. It only watched, patiently, like a predator waiting for its moment. Then the girl appeared. She was ghost-thin, clothes shredded and soaked. She didn't speak or blink, only stared past me at the water. I tried to help, but she was trapped in some other place, haunted by something I couldn't see. At night, the water around the fortress stirred. Something enormous lurked beneath, circling, waiting. I tried to save her, rowing a battered boat across the pools, but the creature pushed us away with powerful waves. The park was alive, hungry, and I was its last guardian in a drowning abyss. I don't know how much longer I can hold on before the waters claim me too. The days blurred together, a slow slide into something unrecognizable. I kept my routine, checking the gates, fixing broken lights, and dragging my feet past rusted rides that groaned under the weight of silence. The trailer had become a fortress of its own, barricaded against things I couldn't name but felt crawling just beyond the walls. Sometimes I caught glimpses, shapes moving just past the edge of vision, reflections that weren't mine. At the edge of the kiddie pool, I found a tangle of seaweed, thick and black, as if pulled up from an ocean floor. It smelled like death. I dropped it back into the water, but the pool never seemed to clear. The girl stayed near the fortress, curled in the shadows. I tried to get her to eat, but her eyes remained distant, lost in whatever nightmare had dragged her here. When she whimpered, the water around her would ripple and pulse, like something alive beneath waiting to strike. One night, the old pause system crackled to life with a chilling message. A child's laughter, warped and twisted, echoing through the empty park. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the sound, heart pounding, but found only silence. The air was thick, heavier than ever, and the pools looked blacker, deeper, as if they had swallowed the moon. I knew then the park wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting. For what? I wasn't sure, but I was running out of time. The morning light was a pale thing, filtered through thick clouds that hung low over Driftwater Falls. The air was colder now, sharp with the scent of damp earth and something fouler, a stench I couldn't place but knew too well. It clung to my clothes, my skin, and even my thoughts, gnawing away at any comfort the daylight might have offered. I found her sitting at the edge of the fortress again, knees drawn tight, fingers digging into the cracked plastic platform. Her hair was tangled with leaves and dirt, her skin almost translucent beneath the grime. When I approached, she barely looked at me, her gaze fixed on the black water swirling beneath the surface. I reached out slowly, voice low. "We need to get you somewhere safe." She didn't move, but a shiver ran through her frame as if she knew what waited beneath. The pool rippled in response, like a dark breath exhaled from some ancient, unseen creature. I looked around, trying to find a way to pull her from the edge, but the park was different now. The paths were slick with moss, the fences twisted and rusted. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift, as if the park itself was breathing, alive in a way I never wanted to understand. Then, the knocking started. A hollow, rhythmic sound echoing from the depths of the mirage pool. It wasn't water striking stone. It was deliberate, like a warning or a call. I felt my heart hammering in my chest as I scanned the dark surface. Ripples bulged and folded, and then something massive slid just beneath the water, large enough to dwarf the boat I'd used last time. Its shape was vague, an impossible blur of scales and muscle, but I knew it was watching. The girl whimpered, eyes darting to the water, but still, she didn't flee. I grabbed the rope tied to the old rowboat nearby. "Come on," I said, forcing myself to sound calm. "We're getting out of here." She hesitated, but something in her shattered gaze made me think she knew there was no other choice. As we pushed off, the water responded. Waves lapped against the boat, gentle at first, then swelling as the creature moved alongside us. I could feel the power beneath the surface, the sheer, overwhelming force that could crush us without a second thought. I rowed harder, every muscle screaming, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature stayed just below the surface, sometimes brushing the side of the boat with cold, slimy skin. The closer we got to the far edge, the louder the knocking became, pounding in my ears like a frantic heartbeat. Suddenly, the water exploded beside us. A massive shape breached the surface, a twisted head crowned with fronds that looked like seaweed, eyes like dark voids that seemed to swallow the light. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth that gleamed like shards of glass. I froze. The girl screamed, a raw, animal sound that tore through the night air. Then the creature vanished, slipping back beneath the waves like a nightmare, dissolving at dawn. We scrambled onto the cracked concrete bank, soaked and trembling. I held her close, feeling the cold seep into my bones. Behind us, the park was silent again, but I knew it was only waiting for its next move. I'm not sure how much longer I can last here. Every day, the water calls louder, and every night I dream of drowning in its endless depths. But I'm still here, and so is the park. Days passed in a strange blur, the kind that leaves you unsure if time still moves or if you're trapped in a slow, suffocating loop. The trailer had become my only refuge, a fortress battered by wind and shadow. Each night, I lay awake, listening to the distant creaks and groans of the empty park settling. But the silence was broken by something else. Soft, wet sounds that seemed to come from just beyond the walls, like something pacing, waiting. The girl hardly spoke, her eyes hollow, lost in whatever place had pulled her into this nightmare. I tried to feed her, coax her back to some semblance of life, but it was like trying to breathe life into a ghost. She'd sometimes whisper strange words in a language I couldn't understand, words that sounded like the slow drip of water in a cavern. One evening, The park's old PA system crackled back to life. A voice, distorted and childlike, echoed through the empty corridors, laughter twisted with static, a chilling sound that sent a cold wave down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the source, my breath visible in the cold night air. But the halls were empty, the only response the soft splash of water somewhere deep within the park. The pools had turned black, thick with algae and something darker beneath the surface. The water seemed to pulse, as if breathing. I stood on the edge, flashlight trembling in my hand, staring into the abyss. And then, I saw it. A shape, vast and shifting, just beneath the surface, too big for any animal I'd ever seen, scales glinting with an unnatural shimmer. Its eyes like empty voids locked with mine for a long, unbearable moment. The girl whimpered behind me. I wanted to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The park wasn't just a place anymore. It was a living nightmare, and I was its prisoner. The nights grew colder, and the park's silence deepened into something far worse than emptiness. It was as if the shadows themselves had substance, pressing close, whispering secrets I dared not hear. The trailer became a cage, the walls thin against the weight of unseen eyes. The girl, whose name I never learned, remained trapped in that liminal space between life and whatever she'd fallen into. Sometimes she would suddenly snap out of her daze, her eyes sharp and wild, but just as quickly would slip back into that vacant stare, as if the dark waters were pulling her back. One evening, I found a message scrawled in the dirt near the wave pool. "Leave before the water rises." The handwriting was jagged, trembling, like someone afraid and desperate. I had no idea who'd written it, if it was a warning or a threat, but the chill that ran down my spine told me to listen. That night, the knocking began again, hollow and rhythmic, echoing from the mirage pool's depths. I grabbed the flashlight and went to investigate, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst. The water's surface rippled unnaturally, a black mist rising as if the pool itself was breathing. From beneath, a hand emerged, long fingers tipped with what looked like sharp claws. The water foamed and hissed, and I stumbled back, nearly falling into the depths. I ran to the trailer, locked every door and window, and sat trembling, the sound of that knocking hammering in my ears. The park was alive. It wasn't just waiting. It was hungry. And I was its last meal. The days blended into one another in a slow, creeping haze. My skin grew pale from lack of sunlight, and my hands were always damp, slick with the moisture that seemed to seep from the very air around Driftwater Falls. The girl stayed silent, most of the time, curled like a wounded animal in the corner of the trailer. Her eyes, hollow and glassy, sometimes flicked toward the pools, as if the black water whispered secrets only she could hear. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly, heavy rain pounding the rusted roof and turning the cracked concrete paths into rivers. I hated storms here. They seemed to awaken something ancient, something angry. The mirage pool swelled, its surface roiling like a living thing, and from its depths rose that terrible knocking sound again, deep and relentless. I grabbed the old boat from the storage shed, ropes frayed and oars splintered, and headed toward the fortress. The girl followed silently, her footsteps light on the wet ground. The closer we got, the thicker the fog became, swirling with the smell of brine and decay. The pool's water churned beneath the jungle gym, dark as ink and alive with unseen movement. Suddenly, the water erupted beside the boat. A vast, shadowy figure broke the surface, scales catching the lightning's flash, eyes gleaming with cold intelligence. It loomed over us, silent and terrible, a creature born from the darkest depths of nightmares. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The girl whimpered and clung to me, trembling. The creature's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, something like recognition passed between them. Then it vanished beneath the waves, leaving only ripples and the echo of my pounding heart. We pulled ourselves onto the shore, soaked and shaking. The park was silent once more, but I knew the nightmare was far from over. Driftwater Falls was alive, and it was waiting. The creature's absence was no relief. Instead, the air thickened with a waiting tension, like the calm before a storm breaks loose. Days passed with no sign of the girl's recovery. She remained curled near the trailer's dim corner, whispering incoherent fragments of a language older than the park itself. One morning, I found a note scrawled on a soggy piece of paper pinned under a loose floorboard. "The water remembers." The words sent a chill deep into my bones. I knew the park had secrets, dark, tangled memories, but this was a warning. That night, the knocking returned, louder and more insistent. I ventured out into the fog-heavy park, flashlight trembling in my hand. The mirage pool lay before me, black and motionless, but then the surface rippled and split open. From the depths, a massive hand emerged, clawed and slick with dark slime. The water hissed and churned, and I stumbled back, heart pounding. Whatever lurked beneath, it was waking up, and hungry. I fled back to the trailer, locking every door and window. Outside, the knocking echoed on and on, a relentless summons from the abyss. The park wasn't just alive anymore. It was angry, and I was running out of time. The night stretched on endlessly, each one darker and heavier than the last. The trailer felt less like a refuge and more like a prison. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle in the dead leaves outside, made my heart race. I barely slept, haunted by dreams of drowning in endless water, of being pulled beneath the surface by cold hands that never let go. The girl grew thinner, more fragile. Her eyes, once hollow, began to glow faintly with an unnatural light. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would whisper strange, melodic words that twisted and turned like water currents. I didn't understand, but I feared the meaning. One evening, I found her standing at the edge of the mirage pool, staring into the black water. She turned slowly, her voice soft and distant. "They remember. They're coming." Before I could respond, the water erupted in a furious swirl. Something massive broke the surface, long limbs covered in slick scales, eyes glowing with cold intelligence. The creature moved with terrifying grace, circling the pool as if preparing for a hunt. I grabbed the nearest piece of wood and shouted, trying to scare it away. It stopped and looked at me, unblinking and unafraid. Then, with a speed that made my blood run cold, it vanished beneath the waves. I knew then the park was lost, and so was I. The cold seeped into my bones like a slow poison. Days melted together in a haze of exhaustion and fear. The park had become a living nightmare, twisting every shadow, every whisper into something malicious. Even the sunlight felt wrong, weak and pale, failing to reach the depths where the water hid its secrets. The girl, fragile as a flickering candle, seemed more tethered to the darkness than the world of the living. At times, she'd turn to me with eyes wide and terrified, murmuring, "The water knows. It remembers." I didn't know what she meant, but the urgency in her voice was undeniable. One night, a sudden storm tore through the park, thunder shaking the ground and rain flooding the cracked paths. The mirage pool swelled violently, the water churning like a beast awakened. The knocking came again, louder, desperate. I fought against the storm to reach the pool, my heart pounding with dread. There, beneath the storm-tossed surface, I saw the creature rise, its scaled body glistening in the flashes of lightning, eyes burning with a cold, ancient hunger. It watched me with a cruel intelligence, as if weighing the fate of its next victim. I had nowhere left to run. The creature's gaze pinned me in place, cold and unyielding, like the crushing weight of the abyss itself. For a moment, time seemed to slow, the rain blurring the world into streaks of gray, the thunder a distant roar, the creature's eyes the only sharp detail in the storm. I felt the pull of the water, an impossible gravity dragging at my soul, whispering promises of oblivion. The girl's trembling voice broke through my trance. "They're coming," she said, barely audible over the storm. "The water remembers. The park remembers." With a sudden surge of desperation, I grabbed her hand and pulled her away from the edge. The water erupted in a violent spray, as if the depths themselves rejected our escape. The creature vanished beneath the surface, leaving only swirling ripples and the heavy scent of salt and decay. We ran through the rain-drenched park, the shadows closing in around us like hungry jaws. The rusted rides groaned and twisted, the darkness alive with unseen eyes. I knew then that Driftwater Falls was no longer a place, it was a prison, and we were trapped inside its endless, drowning nightmare. The storm passed, but the chill it left behind settled deep in my bones. The park felt different now, as if the very air was charged with menace. The silence was heavier, almost suffocating, broken only by the distant drip of water leaking from broken pipes. The girl stayed close, her eyes haunted by something only she could see. She barely spoke, but when she did, it was always the same. The water remembers, it waits. I tried to hold on to the fragments of normalcy, checking the fences, keeping the gates locked, rationing the food. But the park was changing, shifting beneath my feet like a living thing. One morning, I found footprints leading from the poolside to the edge of the woods, large, wet, and dragging as if something heavy had been pulled along. The prints disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the mist. That night, the knocking returned, louder and more insistent. I stood by the mirage pool, flashlight shaking in my hand, watching the water ripple and swell. Then, without warning, the water exploded upward. A mass of dark scales and sinew surged from the depths, eyes blazing with cold fury. I screamed, stumbling backward as the creature lunged toward the shore, but then it stopped, paused as if considering me, before sinking back beneath the surface with a final, shuddering ripple. The park was alive, and it was angry. The air grew colder with each passing day, the once bright sun now a distant memory behind endless gray clouds. Driftwater Falls had become a place suspended between worlds, neither alive nor dead, but something far worse. The once familiar sounds of splashing water and laughter were replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant knocking that echoed like a death knell. The girl's presence was a haunting reminder of the park's twisted fate. She wandered the grounds with vacant eyes, whispering fragmented warnings of the water's memory and its endless hunger. I tried to protect her, to keep her tethered to the world, but I feared the darkness had already claimed her. One night, a violent storm tore through the area. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the roiling surface of the mirage pool. The water boiled and churned as the creature beneath rose again, its massive form casting monstrous shadows, eyes glowing with ancient malice. I stood frozen, heart pounding as the beast's gaze met mine. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, the water's surface shimmering like liquid glass. For a moment, I saw not a monster, but something tragic, a guardian of a forgotten abyss, trapped between worlds. Then the creature vanished, sinking into the black depths as the storm subsided, leaving me alone with the girl and the endless silence. The park had claimed us both. The weeks that followed felt like a slow descent into madness. The park's eerie stillness pressed against my mind, warping every sound and shadow into threats and whispers. Even the sun seemed reluctant to rise, casting long, sickly shadows that crawled like fingers across the cracked concrete. The girl remained by my side, her skin pale and cold, her eyes haunted by visions I couldn't comprehend. She spoke less now, her murmurs reduced to fragments, words in a language lost to time, dripping with sorrow and warning. One evening, as the sky bled into twilight, I found her standing at the edge of the mirage pool. The water was black and thick, reflecting the dull, bruised clouds above. Her voice broke the silence, trembling and soft. "They're coming." Before I could ask who, the water erupted violently. A monstrous shape surged forth, its body a mass of slick scales and twisting limbs, eyes burning with ancient fury. The air was thick with the stench of brine and decay, and the park seemed to pulse with life and death entwined. I grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her away as the creature's roar echoed like a death knell. We ran through the abandoned park, the darkness closing in like a living thing, but there was no escape. Driftwater Falls was a cage, and we were its prisoners. The creature's presence lingered long after it vanished beneath the water, like a shadow cast over every corner of the park. The air grew thick with a salty, rotten scent that clung to my clothes and skin, a constant reminder that Driftwater Falls was no ordinary place. The girl, fragile, lost, still wandered the grounds. She spoke rarely, but when she did, it was in whispers, chanting words that twisted and turned like eddies in a dark stream. Her eyes glowed faintly, as if lit by some otherworldly flame, and I feared the darkness was claiming her piece by piece. One night, I awoke to the sound of soft knocking at the trailer door, rhythmic, deliberate, and chilling. I held my breath, heart hammering, before cautiously pulling the door open. Outside was nothing but mist curling along the ground, thick and suffocating. That was the moment I realized I was no longer alone. The park had been waiting for me all along. The mist wrapped around the park like a living thing, curling into every crevice, swallowing sounds and light. I felt it press against my skin, cold and damp, seeping into my bones. The knocking came again, soft but insistent, echoing from the depths of the mirage pool where the water had turned black and still, as if it were waiting. The girl followed me silently as I moved toward the pool, her eyes flickering with a strange light. I gripped the old boat's rotting rope and pushed it into the water. The surface rippled and pulsed beneath the hull like the breath of some enormous creature. Suddenly, the water erupted, and the dark form surged upward, massive and terrible, scales glinting like shards of obsidian, eyes burning with ancient hunger. It circled us slowly, deliberately, and I could feel the weight of its gaze, crushing and cold. The girl whimpered, clutching my arm. The creature watched her for a moment, then sank beneath the waves with a final ripple. We pulled ourselves ashore, soaked and trembling. The park lay silent once more, but I knew the nightmare was far from over. Driftwater Falls was alive, and it was waiting. The days slipped away in a fog of exhaustion and dread. The park had become a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, every corner alive with unseen eyes. The girl drifted through the ruins like a ghost, her fragile frame swallowed by the darkness that clung to the broken rides and shattered pools. One morning, I discovered strange symbols carved into the wood of the fortress, a language twisted and foreign, etched deep with desperation. The words seemed to pulse with a terrible energy, and I felt their meaning slip just beyond my understanding, like a warning whispered on a wind I couldn't hear. That night, the knocking returned, louder and more urgent. I stood by the mirage pool, heart pounding, as the water's surface began to boil and churn. A monstrous form emerged, scales glistening under the pale moonlight, eyes burning with ancient fury. I raised my voice in defiance, shouting into the darkness, but the creature only watched, unblinking and cold. Then, with a sudden movement too fast to follow, it vanished beneath the waves, leaving only silence and the echo of my own fear. Driftwater Falls was no longer a place. It was a nightmare, and I was trapped inside it. The girl's whispers grew more urgent, words spilling out like a tide I couldn't hold back. The water remembers. It wants us to remember. Her eyes flickered with a light that wasn't her own, a glow that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the knocking. I knew then the park wasn't just haunted. It was a living memory, a vessel of something ancient and hungry feeding on those trapped inside. One last night, I stood by the mirage pool, the cold air biting through my jacket. The water churned, black and endless, and the knocking grew deafening, pounding like a heartbeat from the depths below. Then the creature rose, bigger, more terrifying than before, scales glittering like shattered stars, eyes burning with a cold fire. But this time, I didn't run. I faced it. With the girl at my side, I reached into the darkness and spoke the words she whispered, a chant older than time itself. The water stilled. The knocking stopped. The creature's eyes softened, and for a moment, it seemed less monster, more guardian, an ancient being bound to the park's endless sorrow. The girl's glow faded, and she turned to me, a faint smile on her lips. Driftwater Falls was still broken, but maybe, just maybe, we'd begun to heal. Morning came slow and pale. The park felt different, quieter, somehow lighter. The oppressive weight of the water's hunger had eased, leaving a fragile stillness in its place. The pools shimmered faintly in the dawn, no longer black, but reflecting the first soft rays of sun. The girl stood beside me, eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "It's over," she whispered. "Why?" I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Driftwater Falls would never be truly normal again. The scars beneath its surface ran too deep. But we had faced the darkness and survived. For now. As I packed the trailer for the last time, I glanced back at the park, empty, silent, and waiting. Waiting for the next story, the next secret buried beneath its waters. I stepped into the morning light, leaving the shadows behind. And finally, I walked away.